yeah, it's a bit of a novel experience for me. Less of a novel experience for you guys. We were just discussing this, and we think possibly that Sammy Wilson at the end, that you have got the record of those on stage of having been at the most conferences.
That's probably true. I'm still not the oldest. Just want to make that quite clear to you.
Do tell.
And it's unusual for us to have you up here, because usually we're berating you down there. We'll do that later. It'll even better face to face.
You could just do it up here. You know.
We will, yes.
But you've been a party member since you were a teenager. I mean, you must have also, you must be Gregory rivaling him. For
but Sammy's older, I think. I got that in before he does.
and Ian in the middle, obviously much younger, completely different generation.
He came in a carry cot.
Right. You're right.
But we go back a long way, because the first time I bumped into you, you had a leather biker jacket on and hair to sort of around here, was it?
Yeah, at Queen's University. It was, I think, your first week at the BBC in Northern Ireland, and I was a student at Queen's. And there was this protest taking place, and you were sent up with your television camera to find out what was going on. And we just bumped into each other in the street. And you asked me a question, then you asked me my name. And I think you said, "No, you can't be." And then
I thought you were having me on. He said, "I'm Ian Paisley." Yeah. I thought, this guy is just a bit of a joker.
He's got a scoop, you know. Yeah.
I might be new to this beat, but you know, I know that Ian Paisley doesn't have long hair and a biker jacket on. But then subsequently, of course, you did consider a career in journalism, and you came in on a little bit of work experience with us. Have you ever thought of an alternative universe whereby you were going down the journalistic road rather than the political road? You know, where might you be?
I've figured that making history is better than writing about it.
Right. Well, what we're going to do with this session is we are going to talk about some of the issues in particular subject matter that you've been campaigning on at Westminster. We'll run through that bit by bit. But I think we should sort of address the elephant in the room to start with, which is there's a perception out there that you guys are quite happy with the position at Stormont at the moment because Westminster's still running and you're not necessarily that bothered either way about devolution. Is that true or not, Sammy Wilson?
No, it's not. I mean, first of all, most of us have served in the Assembly. Some of us, I think about half of us, served as ministers in the executive. The party made huge sacrifices, of course, to ensure that the Assembly, which over the first 4 years of its life stumbled from one crisis to another, namely because Sinn Féin were still not supporting the police and had still not espoused terrorism. We made that happen at St Andrews. And you know, I had the privilege of, I suppose, serving in the Assembly when it was running most smoothly. I'm proud of the achievements that the Assembly made at that stage. We don't forget, there are things that are happening today that were initiated by the Assembly. The small business rates relief happened as a result of the work which was done by the Assembly. The help for contractors, bank accounts, project bank accounts was an Assembly initiative which is now taken up by other parts of the United Kingdom. The co-ownership, which has benefited thousands of young people, was financed initially and heavily by the Assembly. And I could go on with all the achievements. So, I mean, we see the benefits of devolution, where it can respond to local issues and respond quickly. The problem, of course, is at the moment, is that given the way in which things have turned out, the Assembly couldn't function because you can't have the consensus which is required to make it work. And you know, we worked hard at that consensus while we were the biggest party. And now that consensus is broken down, you can't be preached at for years that the minority nationalist community could not be ignored, and then told that suddenly when nationalists become the biggest parties in the Assembly, that unions can be ignored. And that's really our issue. Not that we don't want the Assembly up and running, but we want the Assembly up and running in a way which is sustainable, which respects the unionist community as well. And I think that that's what we have to achieve. Otherwise, you'll just have another crisis in another 6 months or another 9 months, and people will get more and more sick of devolution.
Gregory Campbell, as we sit now at the conference, how far off do you think a breakthrough is on this score?
Well, truth is that we don't know. We've been pressing the government, waiting on responses. They come back with piecemeal responses, but we need, as Sammy said, we need to have a comprehensive response, because it's in everybody's interest, not just unionism. It's in everybody's interest to have a stable government that's built on cross-community consensus. That's almost a by ball now. Everyone knows that's what's required. But it doesn't seem to be too many people apart from the DUP who are working to try and establish that. And you know, I noticed some sections in the media this week, well, for several weeks now, they've been saying the DUP and the party leader are boxed in, they've no way out, they're in an awkward place. And now the same journalists this week were saying, has Jeffrey Donaldson played a blinder? These are the same journalists who were saying that we were boxed in a week ago and a fortnight ago. So, you know, journalism wants to have it both ways with the DUP. Now, we're determined to see our way through this, and we're determined to try and get it on a solid basis that people can benefit from, and we won't expect to get thanks for doing that, but hopefully we'll get a sustainable future for everybody, not just for our own voters.
Ian Paisley, you want to see devolution on a solid basis, but what are the prospects as things stand?
Well, I think this is kind of the search for the elusive Scarlet Pimpernel, and this is the huge fissure, the search for the huge fissure within the Democratic Unionist Party. The party does have people with all views and a range of views in these issues, but we work at this. We have a policy. Our policy is mandated. And we're pursuing a policy line to get devolution. And to get devolution, as both Gregory and Sammy have indicated, on the right terms, that is respectful, but most importantly, that works. Look, what's the motivating factor in all of us? Why do we do this? Because you're right, Mark, we could all probably have a much easier time not doing this. And why do our people follow us? We want to do the best for Northern Ireland. And the best for Northern Ireland is by far the people of Northern Ireland running Northern Ireland effectively, fairly, and with equality. And we want to achieve those things, and I think we can achieve them. But we've got to have a steady nerve, a powerful leader, and we've got to make sure that we get this over the line and we get a result that works for everyone.
Now, we might come back to some of the sort of broader issues before we end the discussion, but I did promise you all that I'd give you a chance to talk about the kind of issues that you've been pursuing. And Paul Goodman, I might actually start with you, because one issue that has been very close to your heart, I know, is the contaminated blood scandal, which saw a large number of people have their lives ruined through contaminated blood, infected with hepatitis and other conditions. This was something personal to you, and you've worked with somebody who you knew very well through the course of addressing that and the inquiry. Tell me about that.
Well, probably better maybe to set the scene. Contaminated blood was blood products that were brought in from the United States, and people who required Factor VIII for operations, maybe they were having surgery or whatever, and people who were haemophiliacs required Factor VIII because it's required to clot their blood. That Factor VIII was contaminated with hepatitis C and HIV at the time, and unfortunately many innocent people caught and were given the contaminated blood, and that affected their whole life. And how it happened, that all politics is local, and someone who comes into your office and tells you about their plight that they're going through and the difficulty in their life and how that this has impacted upon them makes it important that you lobby on their behalf. And as a consequence, there was an inquiry set up, and it was chaired by Sir Robert Francis. That inquiry was basically to identify what happened and how many people are affected. 27,500 people were affected with contaminated blood, and as a consequence, a large percentage of those people have passed away and have had no redress whatsoever. It's a major injustice, and has been to the wider community. Unfortunately, compensation is very late in the day in coming through, because so many of these people have passed away and are never going to be compensated. But there's a need to redress, and the report has already got some interim payments to those that are still alive and are living with the condition, and many of whom have developed liver cancer, and have also had to have liver transplants. And a friend of mine has went through this very process, and as a consequence, it became very close to my heart. So I've been involved in lobbying on this issue, and I think it's vitally important that the government step up to the plate and address the issue. Ken Clark, who was a minister at the time, attempted to bury this whole subject, and I'm using that word, bury, because that's effectively what has happened. They've buried those that got contaminated. Now, we've been assured that it can't happen any longer because screening processes are in place, but this has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed quickly. That report's coming out in the autumn of this year, so we will be ensuring that proper compensation is not just given to those who got the blood, but to their families. And many of those people have passed on to their family the condition that they have, and many of them have given their partner HIV, which they didn't even know they had, and they got it through this process. So we need to have confidence in our blood supply and ensure that those who are in our society can benefit from the health system that we do have and not be contaminated. And this scandal needs to be addressed in a proper way.
Carla Lockhart, you've been pursuing a number of particular interests. Particularly, you are interested in the whole issue of pro-life and abortion, and you've been, I think, chairing the group in Parliament, the pro-life parliamentary group. What's that achieved, and obviously what do you think of what's happened in relation to the reform of the abortion law and the safe spaces legislation, which is the most recent move in relation to this that's just come in here?
Well, obviously it's a privilege to serve in Westminster and be the party spokesperson on this issue, but this is not a new issue for the party. Our party has always been pro-life, and it always has been a voice for the voiceless. So I'm coming in very much on the back of the work that Sir Geoffrey and the good folks along this line have been doing over many years in Westminster, being a voice for the voiceless. I always say in politics, yes, you have the politics, and yes, you have the policies that your party stand by, but for me it's very personal, and I really do believe that the most vulnerable in society is the baby in the womb, and it's really important that we continue to be that voice because they do not have a voice. So for me, it's one of the most important issues to speak out on and speak up on in Westminster. I was honoured to be appointed as the chair of the all-party parliamentary group in Westminster, which covers the whole of the United Kingdom. Very formidable group. I'm sure many in this room will have heard of the MP Fiona Bruce. He has led it for many, many years and it's been co-chaired by Jim and Geoffrey. So I was really honoured to take up the role as chair. Lots of big issues on the life side of things, particularly pills by post. Obviously that was a change brought in by COVID, and we fought very hard against the government to try and have it removed, that piece of legislation removed, like every other piece of COVID legislation at that time. But unfortunately the government didn't remove it. We fought a hard battle, but we're continuing to expose the problems that exist by pills by post and the detrimental impact that it's having on ladies' health care, because obviously pills by post are supposed to be taken by a certain gestation, and unfortunately there are very little checks and balances with people taking it at sometimes up to 30 or 35 weeks, which is really very unhealthy for the woman and obviously the baby. So pills by post, obviously buffer zones, big issue. We've seen in England obviously the 2 people who have been arrested for praying silently outside an abortion clinic. For our party, we want freedom of speech and we want freedom freedom of religion, and there's no need for additional laws because the laws around harassment are already in place to deal with that. So it's we've been dealing with that, and also we are very much as a group looking at the science. You know, we always get the science thrown at us in terms of the pro-abortion side of things, but you know, it's now a proven fact that a baby in the womb at 18 weeks or less feels pain. Yet there can be abortion up to birth if they have a disability, or up to 24 weeks if you know, for any other reasons. So there's lots of work still to do. We want to see life-affirming laws brought back into our United Kingdom. We want to see, obviously, a repeal to what was forced on the people of Northern Ireland. There was no consultation. It was brought in at a time when, obviously, the Assembly wasn't sitting. But we all talk about the views of Northern Ireland. I believe we still have a society that values life and believes that the most basic human right is the right to life. So for us, we'll always be a voice for the voiceless, and we will ensure that in every pregnancy both lives matter. So we'll continue that work earnestly.
Obviously, a lot of strong views on either side of this debate is one of those issues. What would you say to those who may be within the pro-life community think that the absence of Stormont has actually meant that Westminster's been empowered to push ahead with these legal changes?
Well, I think the problem is at Westminster you have a group of very vociferous, belligerent individuals who are determined right across the United Kingdom to make it one of the most liberal places for abortion. So I'm not certain that even if Stormont had have been sitting, that the UK government and the Secretary of State wouldn't have railroaded this in. Because it's the in thing to do and because they think they know better on these things. The reality is that the consultation that was done at the very last leg of the legislation evidenced that over 79% of the respondents were opposed to abortion in Northern Ireland. So we are a life-affirming society. We want life-affirming laws, but we also want to, you know, step up practically as well. We can't say we're life-affirming and we want legislation to protect the baby in the womb. There's a job for us all to do, and that is putting our arms around women and people and families who find themselves in very difficult situations if they fall pregnant. So, you know, I think there's a role for us as politicians to make sure the services are in place for women who find out that their baby maybe has a disability and that they want to keep it. So there's lots to do, and we'll continue the fight.
Jim Shannon, I've left you until last because...
the last shall be first, Mark.
Indeed.
You know, the last shall be first, the first shall be
The
last.
Speaker does that in the House of Commons as well.
Exactly. We all know that Jim Shannon likes to get in the final moments of parliamentary debates in the evenings at Westminster. So one of the points that you often want to raise is about religious freedom. It's something that's close to your heart, and obviously we see what's been happening in the Middle East, and that's part and parcel of that issue. But you have ranged not just over the Middle East, but also over many other areas of the world in relation to that. Tell me about what you've been campaigning on that regard.
It's maybe always good, Mark, to look back to where this all started. It started in, obviously, when I was elected in 2010. As a Christian, obviously, as others are here as well, I would always wish to be where my Lord wants me to be, and I believe He put me in this position as Westminster MP for Strangford for that purpose. Naomi, who's my PPS, and I discussed the matter and how we would promote that at Westminster and how we would be used for the service to our Lord and Saviour. Very simply, the issue of religious belief became very acute and aware for me early on. This party, Wally McRae was the whip and Nigel Dodds was the leader. We applied for a debate. We got the debate on the persecution of Christians 2012. I don't think it had ever been debated at Westminster until that time. In 2014, just to very quickly run through the catalogue of times, Elizabeth Burridge, Baroness Burridge as she is now, she and I decided to start an APPG as an all-party parliamentary group on freedom of religious belief, religion and or belief. simply because as a Christian, obviously we're going to speak up for Christians, but we speak up for others across the world as well, and we've done that specifically in the chamber. 2014 started off small beginnings, perhaps maybe 30 members. We now in 2023 have 180 MPs and peers of the House. I chair that APPG, have done since 2014. And the great thing about it, Mark, is that right across the whole political spectrum, we have all the political parties, and that's every political party, individuals as well, who subscribe to that central belief. We can't differentiate, Mark, between human rights and religious belief and persecution, because they both walk hand in hand. And where you see abuse of human rights, you will see abuse of those with religious beliefs. I've been fortunate over the years in that service and highlighting that issue. I've been to Pakistan twice. In 2018, we're back there in February of this year. I would love to be able to tell you that things have improved, but they haven't. That's a fact. So it's really disappointing that the persecution of Christians, of Sikhs, of Hindus in Pakistan is as prevalent, if not worse, today than it was in 2018. Been to Nigeria, where it will be the melting pot, I believe, for Africa. It's the biggest country in Africa, population-wise. There's a balance, a very, very small balance between Christians and Muslims. Sharia law has been trying to be imposed upon Christians in Nigeria. Again, an example of where we speak up for that. We've been to, obviously, other countries, been to Jordan, been to Egypt, met President El-Sisi. I was very impressed by him, I have to say, when I met him in 2012. But he confirmed that the right to worship your God as you wish would be enshrined. So all of those things there build the picture. Whether it be the Shias or the Sunnis, the Baha'is in face in Iran, the gentlest people you'll ever meet in all your life as a Baha'is, persecuted, no jobs, no employment, no property rights. Their graves are desecrated and they're persecuted and put in prison. That's just one example. The Muslims in India, I mean, I'll probably get trolled by the Indian people, supporters, probably shortly after this. But the fact is, in India, if you're a Christian or if you're a Muslim, if you're anything other than a Hindu, your rights will be persecuted right across there. The Myanmar Muslims, the Uyghur Muslims in China, Jehovah's Witnesses in Moscow and Russia. Baptists, I'm a Baptist. There probably many other Baptists in here, I'm sure of that. Whenever Russia invaded the Donbass, a number of Baptist pastors went missing. They were kidnapped, they were murdered, and have never been found. So that's a level of persecution across the world. 200 million Christians will live in an endangered neighbourhood. That's the fact of persecution across the world. I speak up for every one of those who have a Christian faith, those with other faith, and those with no faith. And I use business questions every Thursday to highlight somewhere in the world where persecution is rife. And I always get a fairly good response from Penny Mordaunt, to be fair, and she always puts it through to the correct minister, to the right person. So massive issue, but not for my glory, but for my Lord and Saviour.
Gregory Campbell, I've got in the notes about what to talk to you about. 3 initials, BBC.
I can't imagine why.
I'm assuming you want to discuss Strictly Come Dancing?
Basil Brush.
That's a possibility, Mark, but possibly later. Yes.
What's your problem with the BBC?
I don't have a problem with the BBC. Sometimes they seem to have a problem with us. And, you know, that's something that they're going to have to adjust to. But let's look at this. I mean, you're getting a flavour of the diversity of the issues that we all raise in Parliament and outside of it. The issue of the BBC is, of course, it's a public sector broadcaster paid for by us all, so it's quite different and quite separate from commercial broadcasters. So you have a position where we're all paying for a service, and up to very recently, it was shrouded in secrecy. I mean, we launched a campaign many years ago to try and ensure that the people that we pay to present programmes, that we find out how much we pay them. And the BBC wouldn't tell us. And we campaigned on that for years, and then they came up with this wonderful idea. What we'll do is we'll release it, but we'll release it in bands. So you can imagine, Mark, what it would be like if you were interviewing me when you worked for the BBC and you said to me, how much do you earn as an MP? And I said, well, I'm not going to tell you. You'd be outraged. And then if I said then, well, I will tell you, and it's somewhere between 50 and 100,000. Can you imagine doing that and getting away with it? But that's what the BBC tried. So they had this huge banding, and some of us said, no, that's not going to work. You're going to have to tell us how much do these people that we pay, how much do they earn? And remember, they're asking us about our expenses, but we're not allowed to know what their expenses are. Totally unacceptable. So they managed to be dragged kicking and screaming into the real world. And then, of course, in recent days, and I'll not go into too much detail because you'll understand why, we've had some of the outrageous and unacceptable behaviour of a very small number of individual journalists who bring shame on the journalistic profession. And I've had to write to the Director General of the BBC, have debates in the House of Commons about a very small number. And I know colleagues, I know Ian wrote to the Culture, Media and Sport Committee about the issue. We're all going to have to keep pressing these issues, that things that happen that shouldn't happen are exposed and dealt with in the same way as they would in any other workforce. So the BBC could be a fine, independent, impartial, journalistic output, and I would like them to be. But the problem is these issues that underlie some of the problems that go on at the BBC, and they have been dragged kicking and screaming into confronting some of them, but we're not there yet. There's much more to come, Mark. I can promise you that.
Mark, there's also the issue, of course, of this enforced payment for a body, which many of us disagree with the kind of political input that there is in it, the bias that there is in it. And in a world where people can now choose to pay for Netflix or Prime TV or whatever, it's an anachronism to say that everybody has to pay for the BBC service. You know, in a free market economy, we should all be allowed to choose how we spend our money. And certainly I resent spending my money and my money being spent on some of the news content and the biased content that we hear from the BBC, where BBC can't even call people terrorists when they're running around beheading babies. I mean, that's the kind of scandal, and that's why many people resent paying the fee, and that will have to move too.
There you are. That needs to get off the fence.
You wouldn't expect me to sit here without a bit of pushback.
As a former employee of the BBC,
as a former
you have to say.
I think there's maybe a perception amongst broadcasters that political parties cheer you on when you're investigating their opponents, but aren't so happy when you're investigating them. Is that what's the problem here?
No, it's not the problem, Mark. I mean, I got into some difficulty a few years ago with a certain former colleague of yours because there was all sorts of controversy about that individual then, as there is now. And that presenter said to me, you know, I'm going to keep on digging. And I said to him, well, digging works both ways. Now, when I said that, I was immediately confronted by people online who said, you're threatening these journalists by digging. I said, well, why are they not threatening me if they're saying digging is going to continue? No, you can ask questions and we have to answer them. But the BBC has to answer questions as well as pose them. And they have a problem in being open and transparent. And if they investigate and treat everybody fairly, there isn't a problem. But they seem to have a problem with fairness and impartiality. On some occasions, there are some excellent journalists who work with the BBC and work outside the BBC, but there are some who are not.
I've got this vision of a parallel reality in which Ian continued with his work experience in journalism and you were complaining to the Director General, Ian Paisley.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah. Let's return to our current reality, because I did promise again that I'd confront some of the sort of local issues in areas you've been campaigning on. And I know you wanted to talk about Wrightbus and I suppose getting into the whole business of the hydrogen economy. And it's a firm that's been through some pretty tough times and yet seems to be in a reasonably positive place at the moment.
Yeah, I think, Mark, it's a real privilege to be a member of Parliament, I think, as Carla said. You have the opportunity to represent a constituency. Obviously, in my case, the best constituency out of all 650 of them. But not only do you have the opportunity to represent the constituency and its people, but also have a helicopter view of what's happening across your patch, across Northern Ireland, and across the whole of the United Kingdom, and to try and be a voice fitting in to the kingdom and what's happening there. And I think as Team Northern Ireland, I think our team does it very well, and Parliament knows about Northern Ireland, knows on every subject that we're just there, not just about the Northern Irish issues, but we're there about all of the issues across the UK, and that's very important to us. Jobs and employment are vital. To make sure that people have healthy opportunities to get into employment, can make a good standard of living, can raise their children, building and being part of that, and helping to be, I suppose, a negotiator in that, or else a facilitator with companies, is very important. A few years ago, Wrightbus was the largest employer, one of the largest employers in Northern Ireland. It had over 2,000 people. It then unfortunately had a downturn, and that downturn drove it right to the point where it was left with 49 people and a multi-million-pound debt, and basically at wipeout. And a Chinese corporation was going to buy it over. Now, our experience knows that China was interested in it because not only snuffing out hydrogen technology in Europe, because Wrightbus was at the cutting edge of hydrogen development, but snuffing it out in Europe would mean that we would be reliant upon battery technology in every product, and battery technology is driven by China. And I certainly had that overview. I also had my concern that to see that company fail would be disastrous for my local economy. It'd be the equivalent, losing 1,000 jobs in Northern Ireland would be the equivalent of losing about 20 to 30,000 jobs in the UK. That's the impact. I had the opportunity one night, I was actually at a cinema, and I met this guy called Joe Bamford and his wife. And I was chatting to them, and he expressed his interest in hydrogen. And about a year and a half later, when Wrightbus hit the buffers, I found his card, telephoned him and said, "Joe, can I have a conversation with you? I know you're interested in hydrogen. There might be something you're interested in Northern Ireland." And we had 3 cups of tea. And by the 3rd cup of tea, I'd convinced him to come to Northern Ireland and at least look at the company. And as a result of him doing that, over a period of about 6 weeks, he then moved from being interested to being a prospective buyer, to then being the man who put tens of millions of pounds into buying that company. And within the last 3 years, that company has gone from 49 employees to 1,100 employees, has been in profit every year since, is the largest producer of battery and hydrogen zero-emission buses across the world.
Not down here.
Not across Northern, across the world. It produces, it is the only hydrogen public transport system operational in the world. It sells buses to Germany. Imagine that. Selling to one of the best engineering companies in the world. It sells buses to Australia. It's about to do a major deal before COP28 in the Middle East. It is driving technology, and it's at the cutting edge. And it's a British industrialist leading it, which is never going to go to China, is going to stay here in the United Kingdom, is going to continue to provide employment and jobs. And my constituents benefit from that, but about 6 or 7 other local companies across Ulster benefit from it also. So as MPs, we see this stuff every day, and we're facilitators, being able to bring someone like that to the table, connect them with something that's happening in our constituencies. Carla, Sammy, Gregory, Paul, Jim, we do it every single day. It's not always reported on, but the outcome is to help the people out there into employment and to make our country better. Because, as I said in my opening comment to you, we really care about this place. We love it. It's our home. And it's going to be the best place in the world because we're going to make it the best place in the world.
Well said.
Sammy Wilson was going to talk to you about the economy. I know you want to talk about sort of lasting impacts of the confidence and supply deal, but also just picking up there on what Ian was talking about. You famously was very, very sceptical about man-made causes of global warming. Where do you stand now, and what do you think of what the government's been doing in terms of net zero?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm not the only person who's sceptical. The Prime Minister's sceptical now,
Exactly,
and has decided that the kind of commitment to reducing carbon dioxide emissions in the economy by 2050, eliminating them or having net zero, is a project which, first of all, is costly. It was reckoned it's maybe cost the economy £3 trillion between now and 2050. It's beginning to hit people in their pockets. And people who, you know, it's all presented as all this, as you're going to save the world. Now, given that 97% of the CO2 emissions are produced naturally, 3% are produced by man, 1% of that 3% is produced by the United Kingdom, and China's building power stations, burning coal, and so's India and other countries almost on a daily basis. Our impact on CO2 emissions is going to be fairly insignificant. Yet, we're turning our economies upside down. We're forcing people to buy electric cars, which are expensive. Well, Jim, you could never want to get the speed that you drive at either. Anyway,
Be careful of your accusations.
we're going to force people to put heat pumps into their homes. I mean, we've almost got like a Stalinist economy now to try and drive towards this net zero. We are all paying for it in our electric bills currently. The parts of my constituency are being destroyed by 400-foot windmills on some of the most pristine land that there is. And I think people are beginning to cotton on that actually it's easy to say, let's aim for net zero, but what are the personal consequences for me? Am I going to be allowed to eat less meat? I'm not going to be allowed to fly on my holidays. There's this nonsense going around that you'll be allowed 2 flights in your lifetime. I use that in a week. Goodness sake. Now, of course, I am an environmentalist, Mark. I've got to say that to you.
That's questionable.
You've definitely got a scrutinise me.
Now, be careful.
Continue.
I have a wee forest. I'm fortunate enough to own a couple of fields. I have a forest of 2,000 trees, which would absorb the carbon footprint of me for my lifetime. So I'm actually doing a bit for the environment. I feed half the birds in the countryside. I think my garden is Sainsbury's, for goodness sake. And wasps and bees and slugs, everything eats from my garden. So nobody can accuse me of not being. I value that I live in a constituency which has got some of the most beautiful places.
The bit you cut off my constituency.
Habitat for animals, all kinds of insects, birds, etc. In fact, as one of the Navy surveyors who was out with last Friday said that when they go up the coast, it's some of the best bird population that they have seen as they survey the whole of the United Kingdom, the seas around the whole of the United Kingdom. So I'm proud of that, and I want to preserve it. But what I'm not supportive of is this kind of politically driven, and it is politically driven, campaign.
Isn't it meteorologically driven?
Sorry?
I mean, isn't it meteorologically driven? We've seen these extreme weather events going on in the Mediterranean and what happened.
Yes,
and
you
so
can't
on.
ignore these things.
Isn't there more and more evidence?
Yeah. You
You
can't ignore them.
Again, you've got to be careful just how this is reported, especially by the BBC, who seem to be as obsessed as the House of Commons on net zero. I mean, fires in the Mediterranean, when the mayor of Rhodes, one of the towns in Rhodes, said this was not caused by extreme weather. This was caused by people setting fires. That doesn't get reported, though. It gets reported in other news channels, but not on the BBC. And we could go into a lot of these other extreme weather events where, yes, there's more damage being caused, but then we've got more people. We're building in places which perhaps in the past we wouldn't have built in, which are always subject to flooding, always subject to hurricanes, whatever. But we see the damage more now because of the increase in population and the fact that we're building in these peripheral areas. But, here's the important thing. That we cannot at a time, and the Prime Minister is now beginning to realise this, we cannot at a time when people are already struggling to make the ends meet, to impose on them additional costs, which the people who make these decisions, who are on good wages and everything else, I mean, it appalls me when I see some of these film stars lecturing us about net zero and need to bring down carbon emissions. And what do? They fly into the conferences to discuss this in their private jets. It's okay for us, but the little man has to bear the burden. And I think that's where we're now getting a kickback in this. And I'm pleased that I've been a member of an all-party parliamentary group in the House of Commons, made up mostly of Conservatives, but some Labour members.
Skeptics,
and
made up of
myself.
skeptics.
No, we're not skeptics.
Yeah.
What we are, we're people who...
People don't believe it,
We're people...
People don't
we're
believe
people
it.
exactly.
The ice is melting more than ever did,
We're
The
people
forests have
actually
disappeared, There's fires over the world, where there's floods, volcanoes, everything's happening. It doesn't happen by accident.
Well, volcanoes, Jim, with all due respect, volcanoes don't start with climate change.
It doesn't happen by accident. That's the point.
I think, Mark,
Shall I call best of order?
I think what you've done is give everybody in here an insight into our weekly parliamentary party meetings.
Yeah.
And now you'll know why they last so long.
I'd be on one side of the debate and somebody would be on the other.
I thought I was going to expose a split between the devolutionists and the integrationists.
This is a man who drives a 4x4.
Yeah, because I have to.
I drive a motorbike.
I live in a rural community where we don't have the bus service that we usually have, so I need my car. I need my Jeep. Somebody knows that better than anybody else.
We're coming towards an end, but I want to keep to the sort of the broader national and international politics. We were discussing, actually, just before we came up onto the stage, Gregory Keir Starmer, some of his recent comments. I mean, are you looking at what he's saying about border polls now and thinking, we might hang on and get a better deal out of this guy?
Yeah, and one of the things I think that hasn't featured in the media has been, and we can't take all the credit for this, but if I look back at my time in Parliament and Jeffrey's time, I mean, the Labour Party of 20, even 15 years ago, was unashamedly a pro-United Ireland party. I'm not saying they're emphatic and strident unionists now, but the Labour Party have moved a considerable way in recent years. So we shouldn't ignore that. And what Keir Starmer is actually saying now is, and we'll take him at face value, that if there were a border poll, he would be campaigning actively to retain the United Kingdom as the four-body composite part of the United Kingdom. So that's progress. It's a lot better than what it would have been under Jeremy Corbyn or some of his predecessors. Mm-hmm. So in terms of what he would be likely to do in the next 12 to 18 months, we'll have to see. We shouldn't second guess the outcome of the election. They are certainly favourites. There's no doubt about that. And next Thursday will be the result of two by-elections, and we'll get a better idea of opinion in those two constituencies there. But I think if Keir Starmer is open to having discussions about how to better run Northern Ireland, and I mean, remember, whenever people say about the range of political parties in Westminster, none of them are saying abandon or scrap the Windsor Framework. Remember, at the time of the Anglo-Irish Agreement, nobody said we're going to do away with this. But you never hear it mentioned now. That's history. It's gone. Even the Belfast Agreement now, we've moved on beyond that. So whether people say they stand by it, they're rigidly behind it, time moves on and events unfold. So let's see what the future brings. We need to keep good relations both with the Conservative Party and with the Labour Party, because who knows what the future will bring. But whoever it is, we need to ensure that we bind the United Kingdom together more strongly with whoever's in government.
Do say, Mark?
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously we've had the Daily Telegraph ran a story saying that Keir Starmer has been keeping you apprised of his thoughts on relationships with the EU. And then there's another interview that's just in the news this morning with the German finance minister saying that the UK should start talking about maybe extra flexibility in terms of trading relations. I mean, what do you read into all of that?
I must say, I do think that the words of Keir Starmer have made it very, very clear that the myth that we're on the precipice of a united Ireland, that there's going to be a vote on a referendum on the future, Northern Ireland's place in the future of the Union, is a myth. He's burst that bubble, and congratulations to your colleague Gareth Gordon for getting those words out of him. I think that is very, very helpful, and I think we can actually, and we need to have, as I said earlier, calm heads at this part. I mean, and that comes from consistent and good leadership, that we know where we're taking Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland's going to be remaining in the United Kingdom. The best place for Northern Ireland and for all of its people is to be part of the 5th or 6th largest economy of the world, to go forward from a position of strength and diversity, and to make sure that this economy and this country continues to function. And words from our the big political leaders, that there's not going to be a referendum, that we're not going to upset the constitutional apple cart, are very, very important to keep people in a calm state and focus on the bigger prize. That's a better, peaceful, stable, economically flourishing UK.
We've just got a couple of minutes left, and Sammy Wilson already alluded to it in relation to this controversy about broadcasters and the terminology they use. But does anybody want to chip in on your thoughts on what's been going on in the Middle East? Because obviously it's the dominant story at the moment.
It's utterly tragic. I mean, William's prayer this morning, and you know, you can't not be moved by the scenes that you've seen. And we pray for all the people of the Middle East and of Israel and of all those people. And I really am perplexed by most people at the way Palestinians are being used as human shields by a terrorist organisation. I mean, those people's lives are as precious as a Jewish man or woman's life. And, you know, I think we have to care passionately for them. And our country, the dispute in our country is showing that talking is far better. And if we can get people to talk about these things and resolve these things, but I just think there's some people who are beyond it. Some people's hatred is so fanatical. And I think we have to pray for wisdom for that nation and for the United Nations as we come to a conclusion, and for strength and for people to recognise that a retaliatory strike by Israel is legitimate given what they have gone through and what they've witnessed.
And last weekend, Mark, don't forget that the attacks by Hamas, a terrorist organisation, upon the Israelis was Israel's 9/11. That's if you take a proportion of those figures of Israelis that were murdered and transfer that to the size of America, it's the worst atrocity in the world. And the slaughter of innocents, the beheading of babies, of women, been raped, people disappeared. Israel has a right to retaliate. I use the words that Hamas should be liquidated, and I mean that. They shouldn't be on this earth at all. They're a terrorist organisation. They should be destroyed, and I think Israel has a right to retaliate.
And Mark,
I'm afraid I can't let you have the last word, Sammy, because I'm against the clock here. We've only got 10 seconds to wrap this up. And so sorry that I didn't get chatting about childcare with you, Carla. I know that's an issue that you've been campaigning on, but we're going to hear from you in a speech in a few moments' time. But would you like to thank the MPs?
No.